In the early days of the Soviet Union, the progress and revolution itself actually inspired many Americans. But there were also many questions, concerns, and a general lack of understanding and knowledge of what the Soviet Union was. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, many publishers, especially those associated with labor unions, would create pamphlets answering questions and dispelling misinformation. I have quite a few in my collection by Anna Louise Strong, so I'm going to show you them. First, from 1927, Marriage and Morals in Soviet Russia. So this is what these sorts of pamphlets looked like. As you can see, very small. Here's the first page, where it clearly tells you what it's all about. And the contents: women in marriage, summary of laws. Lots of other things here, of course. Few questions are more discussed today in the Soviet Union than marriage and morals. Congresses are held about these questions. Pamphlets are prepared for the youth of the nation. Interesting, right? The young woman of Tartar family told me her love tale. There's a really interesting story about the meshing of culture and modern ideas of marriage being mixed well. And the last page is about men not being allowed to deny being the father of a child and having to pay support. Next, from 1928, Was Lenin a Great Man? This one's pretty damaged. The entire cover page is ripped off, but look at that little sticker. Also someone's address from 100 years ago. I'm so sorry. But here we have, was Lenin a great man? What makes Lenin great? Lots of questions. Of course, you could just open this and read one page and say, yes, he was a great man. But of course, there's so much to it. And I think it's really neat that they were directing this towards an American audience with all these different topics. Interesting what Lenin's widow remembers. So Nadezhda Krupskaya's accounts, she wrote a lot after his death and contributed a lot before and after as well, so they should name her. Next is from 1934, Dictatorship and Democracy in the Soviet Union. This is by far my favorite pamphlet out of all of them, and I highly recommend you read it. As a free PDF of this exists online for you to download and read if you Google it really easily. And here's all of the other pamphlets in this particular series that you can also search for. I love that they include that, but there's lots of heavy topics like to drive on the kulaks. If you have questions about what the Soviet line of thought is, how they explained these sorts of sensitive topics, they very clearly state their reasonings and perspectives, and that's all so easy to look up and find an explanation for from their perspective. This bit on foreign workers is also interesting. Even foreigners residing in the Soviet Union are asked to take part in government. When there were 300 Americans employed at the Stalingrad tractor works, the urging of the Russians finally induced them to elect 2 of their number to sit on the Stalingrad City Soviet. Someone must be there to explain your situation and needs and the American ideas about the tractor plant, ran the argument. And on the back of this document is the recommended books, the little Lenin library. It's not uncommon to have recommended reading along with these things. And lastly, what about Russia? An honest reply to honest questions. Probably the best cover art out of all of them. I would pick this up even if I wasn't interested in Russia, you know what I mean? So this, as the title suggests, it's just really common questions at the time. Is Russia ruled by one man, Stalin, much as Italy is ruled by Mussolini, in Germany by Hitler? Of course, very strong, pointed questions, and they answer it. They answer it for you, purposefully. Even questions about the famine in Ukraine, and is there a chance of another famine this year? I love that she says, everyone in the Soviet Union to whom I mentioned this situation just laughs. Reasons for this laughter are, 2 bumper crops in 1933 and 34, and 1 billion bushels of grain in state hands, enough to feed the cities and non-grain farmers for 2 years. Maybe a bit insensitive in how they answered it, a bit sarcastically, but the answer is there nonetheless, at least what they thought. And I lied. Lastly, I actually have this pamphlet, The Soviet Union and World Peace, Disarmament, Non-Aggression, the Far East, League of Nations, and the Franco-Soviet Pact. Honestly, this one's probably the most boring of them all. Very interesting topics academically, but the writing is just a lot more dull, in my opinion.